Hey guys, today we're going to go over how to effectively call a timeout. So, when we do this the right way, a timeout can lead to healthy conflict resolution. However, if this is used incorrectly, they can cause the argument to escalate, often leading to resentment and disconnection. So, my goal today is to show you how to use a timeout as a tool to strengthen communication rather than letting conflicts spiral out of control. So let's start with what a timeout is and what it is not. So, a timeout is basically a break in the conversation where both of you can take a pause to calm down before continuing on the conversation. So, a good example is, let's say that you and your partner are having a tough conversation and you notice that it's starting to take a negative turn and it's starting to feel like more like conflict. So instead of letting your emotions escalate into an unproductive argument, a timeout is going to give you the space to take a minute, cool off, gather your thoughts, and then return to the conversation in a different headspace. So, the purpose of a timeout is to prevent escalation by giving both of you the chance to regulate yourself and to regulate your emotions, and then reapproach the conversation with a clearer mind. So, it's a strategy that really helps you to prevent saying or doing something that you'll later regret while still ensuring that the conversation still happens in a calm and constructive way. So now we know what a timeout is. Let's talk about what it is not and some things to avoid. So the first thing is storming off or leaving the conversation in anger. So when we call a timeout, this is not about, storming off and being upset. This is a mutual structured pause where both partners agree to stop the conversation for a specific period of time and then resume it. When one person leaves abruptly or angrily, it'll typically just worsen the situation. Number two is not returning to the conversation. So when we call a timeout and then we fail to come back to the agreed upon time, it can actually make our partner feel really dismissed. Make sure that you set an agreed upon time and then return to the conversation at that set time. The next one is using a timeout to avoid the issue. So, this is not about getting out of a tough conversation. This is about ensuring that the discussion remains productive and respectful. And then the last one here is holding a grudge or kind of stewing in things. So, we want to make sure that we're using the break to calm down, not to sit around and stew in all of the negative emotions and all of the negative thoughts or holding on to anger, because again, that isn't going to be productive. All right, so why do we need to do this? Why is it so important to call a timeout? The number one thing is that they prevent escalation. So when we take a timeout, it gives us the space that we need to cool off before the discussion turns into a full-blown argument. So as soon as emotions begin to escalate, neither party can effectively communicate, which I'm going to explain further in just a second. The number two is that it allows for emotional regulation. So a timeout is going to give you the time to regulate your emotions. So during any kind of high stress moment, we will often react emotionally rather than logically because the part of our brain that controls logical thinking and problem solving has gone offline as soon as we become flooded. Once that part of the brain goes offline, the amygdala lights up and it goes online. The amygdala is the part of the brain that controls our emotional response. So this is our fight or flight response. So when we call a timeout, it helps us to be able to really process our feelings and emotions in a calm space. Number three is it gives us the time to reframe and reflect. So this helps us to reflect on the actual issue rather than reacting impulsively. So after cooling off, you may actually realize that your initial anger stemmed from miscommunication or a misunderstanding because it gives you that little bit of that break to kind of reassess and reflect on, what is at the root of this, essentially. And then the last one is that it really helps to build trust and safety in the relationship. So, it shows that both of you are committed to resolving conflicts calmly, which is going to build the emotional safety and trust in your relationship. So now on to the big stuff. How do we call a timeout? Number one thing we have to do is we have to notice that we're getting flooded. So in order to do this, we have to know our own physical signs of flooding. So some common signs, some people start sweating, your face might start flushing or get a little bit red, your heart rate might increase, you might notice that you're breathing really rapidly or really shallowly. You might tense up your muscles, you might be making fists, you might feel jittery or restless. Some people will start pacing back and forth. A lot of people will notice that they all of a sudden have digestive issues. They get upset, all of a sudden they're flooded and they have to make a run to the bathroom. That is going to be your first clue that you're flooded and you need to call a timeout. If you don't know your physical symptoms, not everybody is really in tune with their body. Think about the last big fight you had with your partner and then try to recall some of the physical sensations that were happening during your body during that fight. And then those are going to be your physical signs of flooding. Number two, making sure that we are direct but respectful. So we're going to calmly announce that we're getting flooded and we need to take a break from the conversation. So avoid blaming your partner for the need for the pause. So instead of saying something like, you're making me so angry, I can't do this, I'm done with this conversation, and then storming off, we can use an I statement. I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now and I need to take a break to cool down. Let's resume this in, 30 minutes or so. The next one is to state our intention. So this is where we get to clearly express that the timeout is to prevent escalation, not to avoid the conversation. So for example, I'm really overwhelmed. I need to take a break. Let's come back to this conversation in 20 minutes or so. I really want to have this discussion. I want it to be productive so that we can really get to the bottom of this and resolve this issue, but I have to calm down first. And then lastly, this one is really, really important. We have to keep our partner in the loop of what's going on. So if we are the one that called the timeout, we have to communicate how much time we're taking and what we're doing. Could be something simple. I'm going to go out for a drive. I'm listening to some music to calm down. I'll be back in 1 hour and then we'll finish this conversation. Make sure that you are back at the time you said. If, let's say you get back in an hour and you're still feeling kind of flooded after that time has passed, then you also need to communicate to your partner that you need more time. This over communication is going to be crucial. If your partner has an anxious attachment and you say that you need some space without explaining the specifics, chances are they are going to go crazy with all of these made up specifics. And chances are your partner is going to start making up different scenarios. They're going to start worrying, which is just going to make the situation worse. The next one, and this is for the person that did not call the timeout. If your partner calls a timeout, you have to respect it. So this means no following them, no texting them a million times, no calling them 30 times in a row, no guilting or blaming them. So this is, oh, you never want to talk about this. Yeah, this is what you do. You walk away. You always walk away. That is not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to be effective in this. Recognize that your partner needs this time. They are going to come back to the conversation. That's not something you have to worry about. You have to let them take their time. And then the next one, we need to make sure that we're taking a minimum of at least 20 minutes. Takes a minimum of 20 minutes for your body to physiologically calm down. Along with that, make sure that you're doing something that is actually going to be calming to your nervous system. So don't sit there and stew in this situation or think about how mad you are at your partner or think about, the 5 different talking points that you're going to bring into the conversation when you guys actually resume the conversation. Another big one that people think is calming, but it's actually not, is going and playing video games. Video games is actually ramping up the nervous system. So, we recommend do some breath work, do some grounding work, do some meditation, read a book, read a magazine, listen to music, journal. There are so many things that you can do to regulate the nervous system that are actually going to regulate you and calm you down. Next one, our last, this is one of the most important ones. This is not a get out of jail free card. So make sure that you return to the conversation. Otherwise, you're doing nothing but just sweeping the issue under the rug. And not only do you not have a resolution, but there's also a high likelihood that this issue is going to come back up at some point because it hasn't been resolved. All right, now let's talk about how to resume the conversation after we've called the timeout. So first step is we have to return calmly. So sticking to the agreed upon time, returning to the conversation with a calm and really clear mind. So an example of this, using that calm tone, saying, I'm ready to continue our discussion now. How do you feel? Are you ready? Are you calm? Do you need a little bit of time? Just a side note, the person that called the timeout is also the person that's responsible for resuming the conversation. The next one is to use I statements. So this is expressing how you feel using an I statement to avoid placing blame. So, for example, I felt really frustrated because I wasn't feeling heard instead of, God, you never listened to me. This is exactly why we're always fighting. That again is going to come across as blaming. It's going to trigger your partner's defensiveness. They're either going to fight, which is going to be ultimately unproductive, or they are going to go internal and they're going to withdraw from the conversation. Next one is staying focused on resolution. So making sure that we're keeping the conversation focused on the original issue at hand and then being open to our partner's perspective. So it's super important to stay on topic. Otherwise, you risk bringing up all of these past issues and then kind of throwing it at your partner, and that's going to do nothing but overwhelm them, which is going to probably lead to another timeout. And speaking of that, call another timeout as needed. So if you call the timeout, you come back, you're in the discussion again, and you realize that this is again taking a negative turn, there is nothing wrong with calling another timeout. It'll actually be more productive in the long run. It's always, always better to take a pause than risk falling back into the argument. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and we'll talk to you next time.